Hello and welcome to the Manchester is Red podcast. My name is Steven Railston and we are recording on a wet Friday afternoon here in Manchester. That probably symbolises the mood really after Manchester United drew 2-2 with Sevilla in the Europa League on Thursday night. A dominant performance from United in the first half, a 2-goal lead, and they somehow threw it away. I'm going to dissect that game throughout the next half an hour, 40 minutes. And I've got my two esteemed colleagues, Samuel Luckhurst and Tyrone Marshall alongside me. Samuel, how are you?
Not bad, thank you. Not bad, Stephen. How are you?
Well, I was just saying that I could be better. I was invited to Aintree today. Couldn't take up the engagement, so instead you've got me. Lucky yous. And Ty,
so you're not at the races for once. Right?
It's becoming quite a hobby. It's become quite a pastime.
I was expecting you to be there. Yeah.
Ty, how are you?
Yeah, I'm all right. I'm all right, thank you, Stephen. I'm good. At least you're missing this weather at Aintree. But what about a second career as a jockey? That's got a chance for you.
I'm not that small, Ty. Come on, you can't deceive the listeners. I was actually thinking I could be a racing journalist if this all goes a bit Pete-tongue, so I might take up that in the future. But Samuel, with your football to talk about today, like I just said, look, it was a really disappointing end to the game. A fantastic first half, just like against Everton. They were 2-0 up at half-time, but a brilliant brace from Sabitzer. And then a few confusing changes from Ten Hag, I think it's fair to say. Sevilla suddenly grew a bit of confidence to get a goal back in the score in extra time. Can you put into words how disappointing that end of the game was? Because it was really a knock to the face, wasn't it? A disappointing result in the end.
When the first Sevilla goal went in, I think we were discussing that United are going to be angry at winning this 2-1. Never mind not winning it, and then of course it ends up being 2-2, and it's a bit of a disaster. They should have been disappointed had they only won that game 2-0 last night. They were that dominant, but this is the recurring theme. They are a team that do not put teams to the sword, and at some stages, and it's happened before, they end up shooting themselves in the foot, and they certainly did last night when we saw Weghorst, Eriksson and Elanga called back. I think, as Ty said to me at the time, Ten Hag had put three fingers up and he was thinking, this is Ty, he was thinking there's not a number 3 there. And then you saw they were all coming on, and I can't have been the only one who found the choice of personnel odd, because when you're bringing Weghorst and Elanga on, you are knowingly weakening the attack. Fernandes has told us before how much he hates coming off in a game, even if a game is won. He wants to play 90 minutes. Sancho, you think, okay, if you're to make a change and you really want to enhance the attack, okay, take Sancho off because he faded in the second half, but Elanga is a downgrade. Weghorst is a downgrade on Marshall, but of course Marshall doesn't complete 90 minutes. But it was so odd because United were only 2-0 up, and all of a sudden there's this frivolous tone set in the first leg of a European knockout tie. And it was, as I said in my piece, it felt like Old Trafford was hosting Soccer Aid with Weghorst and Langer coming on. I just could not work out the logic behind it. And Ten Hag has protested, why he made those changes. And the rationale just doesn't stack up. He said that Fernandes was on a booking, and Antony, who of course went off in the 81st minute, which was also contentious, was on a booking, and he didn't want to risk sending them off. And yes, the referee last night was officious. The booking of Fernandes for handball was utterly ridiculous, and it can be different dealing with those occasions in continental games because you encounter referees who, as dodgy as English referees are, European referees will sometimes bewilder you even more with their decision making. And United experienced that against Real Sociedad in their first European game of the season with the handball that was given for Martinez, which was never a penalty, but the referee on the night deemed it a penalty. And also Martinez got booked, and that contributed to his suspension later in the tournament. Yet even still, I just don't buy it. You've got to trust the players to rein it in if they have to. And Antony was obviously in a pretty truculent quarrel with Marcos Acuna for a period and was getting the crowd up and trying to wind up Acuna. But then later on, they were sharing a joke, and it's a Brazilian and an Argentinian, so there's bound to be an edge to it. But in the end, it seemed like they laughed it off. But then Ten Hag still took him off, and in fairness to Pellistri, when he does come on in games, he does tend to have an impact. But why wasn't he coming on for Sancho? And I know what Ten Hag would say to that if I bothered to ask him. It would be, well, Anthony Elanga plays on the left wing and Pellistri plays on the right wing, as if that United have started a game with a right-footed left winger and replaced him with a right-footed left winger. I mean, I'm sure Pellistri can play that role. He's played more often than Elanga this calendar year. He started more. He started against Betis this calendar year. When did Elanga last start? I think it might have. Has he even started since the season resumed after the World Cup? I'm not sure he has. So however way you look at it, it just didn't make sense. And I mean, Harry Maguire got booked against Fulham, and that meant he was suspended for the next cup game against Brighton. So completely identical situation to Fernandes. He saw out the game. McTominay and I think it was Fernandes, they both got booked at Newcastle. They stayed on. So it's inconsistent. However, Ten Hag, he wants to protest about it. And of course, in making those substitutes as prematurely as he did, there's always the risk that you end up with 10 men. That's exactly what happened. And to compound matters, that equalising goal comes from a cross into an area where the two centre-backs would usually be. Unfortunately for United, Varane is off, Martinez is off. They're trying to reorganise, and Sevilla preyed on that, but they preyed upon it in a pretty ramshackle way, because the header was going closer to the corner flag before it hits the dumbstruck Maguire and it goes in for the equaliser. So it couldn't have really gone much worse after those changes were made, and also just with Weghorst and like where you're reducing your goal threat. Pellistri and Sabitzer did well to get him into an area where he was probably 6 yards from goal, maybe 8 yards from goal, and it was on for him to just turn and shoot and see if it goes in. But his confidence in front of goal is so low at the moment, he actually laid the ball off to the left back in Malacia. So again, if United were 4-0 up and he makes those changes on the hour, you think, okay, fair enough, give those players some game time, but they weren't. And you take that risk, and sometimes it can backfire, and it certainly did. And it was just strange that a manager who pre-match was so conscious of not underestimating a really poor Sevilla side, and they were dreadful for the majority of that first leg. In the end, he did underestimate them, and Sevilla in the Europa League, it seems like anything is still possible, despite this Sevilla side being the worst Sevilla side for a good old while.
Well, that's Erik panicked, didn't he, when he received that ball from Weghorst? But I mean, any Premier League striker, as you said, Samuel, would surely pivot and have an effort. Any striker with assault would have a go from there from 6 yards. Surely you have to have a shot on goal.
Yeah.
One thing I will say is that Fernandes' yellow card, obviously much has been made of it. The decision to take him off, it really wasn't a yellow card, was it? We can all agree on that. We discussed that before kicking him on there. It was a bizarre decision from the referee. Ty, I think Samuel's hit the nail on the head with the changes, but we've praised Ten Hag all season for his in-game. Fantastic on the whole. But obviously it did let him down last night, and it was pivotal in the game. You got anything to add to what Samuel said? And also, I guess, the first half, the finishing again, that was a huge sticking point, really, because yes, they were 2-0 up at half time, but just like against Everton at the weekend, it should have been 5, really, shouldn't it, or 4-0?
Yeah, they should have been out of sight, and I think when it's turned after 21 minutes, I mean, me and Samuel were saying this should be out of sight. It could have been out of sight at half time, the way they were playing. When I can't remember if I said it to Samuel or I was beginning to write it in my piece. I think I might have said it to Samuel maybe midway through the second half, that if this finishes 2-0, they'll feel disappointed. And somehow it's finished 2-2, which is disastrous for them. And very disappointed now. And yeah, I mean, the substitutions, I think it's all been said, just too many at the wrong time. And you know, arguably you can understand what he's saying about those players, but he has risked players previously. And you just, if you want to do that, fine, but do it in stages. You know, if Marshall has only got that length of time in him, take him off first, take Sancho off 5-6 minutes later, take Fernandes off 10 minutes later. When you're switching it all around in, you know, taking three of your 4 attacking options off the pitch, really, and bringing 2 on who just don't score goals, really, it sent out the wrong message to Sevilla. And like someone said, when I saw him do the 3 signal and call them all back, I thought it was maybe a statement of things are getting complacent, and thought it'd be some of the weaker, maybe more obvious players going off. And I think we were all amazed at the identity of those players who went off. So yeah, I think it was like I wrote in one of my morning pieces, it's been his biggest strength this season, his in-game management, his boldness with substitutions, but it turned into a weakness last night. And one thing I thought was interesting from the press conference, we all got, I was going to say hung up, but we all got involved in debating exactly what it meant when Ten Hag said you never look a cow in the ass. But I did think it was quite interesting that in explaining those substitutions, it did feel like he was rebuking Fernandes and Anthony for getting in that position, really. And I think we've all focused on Ten Hag's decision to make the subs, where it felt like he was laying some of the blame at the players, especially with Anthony. And you could say that even had a bigger impact on breathing life into Sevilla, because he tried that ridiculous trick he does at a point where there was no need to do it. He was never beating a man doing that. It was purely to show off. He just hit the bar. He was playing well. He was full of confidence. He thought, I'll do this trick. He messed it up. The ball went out of play. He lost his temper and kicked out at Acuna. They had gotten a little scrap. And like Ten Hag said, when you're 2-0 up and cruising, don't give the opponents something to hold on to. I can't remember exactly how he phrased it now, but basically don't give them life. And it riled Sevilla up. It caused a melee on the pitch. Acuna, who's maybe their most sort of hot-headed, passionate player, starts having this running battle with Anthony, and suddenly Sevilla feel alive in a game where they've been dead. And all because Anthony tried that trick and started a melee. And you look at Liverpool Arsenal last week. Liverpool were dead and buried in that game. Alexander-Arnold and Xhaka have that coming together, and it kind of breathed life into the rest of the Liverpool team. And the same thing arguably happened with Sevilla. Not to the same extent. They didn't improve dramatically, but they had more of the game, and they clearly finished the stronger, even if there was a big element of luck to both goals. So I did think it was interesting that Ten Hag did kind of point the finger at those two players for even getting in that situation.
Just give them that little bit of edge, didn't it, really, to feel that little bit, the belief it sparked something into the game. I mean, Anthony was a bit naughty kicking out, which I talked about before. VAR could have checked that. It could have been a yellow card or whatever. It was definitely a silly thing to do. And I guess he has that in his game, really has it. It's like something he needs to control going forward. It's one of those players that where you can kind of go either way or the other with that. Samuel, obviously, the result was made even worse by the injuries that was sustained. Varane came off at half-time. Harry Maguire came on for him, and then Lisandro Martinez came off. But all the changes had been used to that point, so United had to play with 10 men for the final stages. Varane and Martinez have obviously been first choice centre-halves this season. They've been absolutely fantastic, and we've discussed at length about the impact Martinez has made. What kind of impact or how bad is that going to be for the team? Because you got Harry Maguire coming in, Victor Lindelof, who, let's face it, we associate it with the Solskjaer reign, that pairing. Can they do a job? Is history showing that they could be good enough for the level that is needed? And there's also concern, isn't it, because Maguire's suspended for the Brighton game, so that throws another spanner in the works.
The back five against Forest could be a Solskjaer back five that he settled on at the start of the 2019-20 season if Luke Shaw's fit for that. To compound matters as well, I suppose, Maguire's suspended for the FA Cup semi-final next week, so if Shaw is not back for that, my gut feeling is that he will be. I mean, Ten Hag spoke quite confidently that he'd be okay for Forest this week. Then you're looking, if provided Shaw is available for the Cup game, then it's going to be a centre-back pairing of Lindelof and Shaw for that one, unless Varane makes a really speedy recovery. But it's not a coincidence that the equaliser came from a cross into an area that, it wasn't Maguire's fault, really. I think it was Casemiro who got out-jumped, and the ball, as I said, it was going over the corner flag, the header, and then it just bounces off Maguire's head, goes in for the equaliser. But at the very end of the first half, there was a really important header by Varane, who was injured at the time, right on his goal line, to ensure that, I think it was from the header that De Gea got, obviously palmed it away and it went up in the air, and Varane is the one who's on the goal line, and he's head and shoulders above everyone to head the ball away, and he does that while injured. That's a sign of someone who's a world-class centre-back, and he has been a world-class centre-back for most of his career, and it's kind of gone under the radar how pivotal he has been to Martinez's brilliant season at United. Martinez had two really, really chastening first games as a United player against Brighton and Brentford. Only lasted a half at Brentford. Varane came in with him for the next game, and as a pair they've not really looked back ever since. They've had the odd wobble or the odd disaster like at Anfield in March, but they've been two of the best centre-backs in the league this season. And Maguire's done okay, and he's obviously got this statistic that in the last 10 games he started for United, they've won all of them. But you look at the opponents they've played in that time, I think they've only come up against one team that were in the top half of the Premier League table at the time of the fixture. Two of the opponents were Reading and Charlton, so that's a Championship side and a Football League side. Real Betis were the other side, who were fifth in La Liga, and United pretty much made mincemeat of them. It's somewhat ironic that United have the worst of the Spanish teams they've played all season in the knockout rounds, and somehow they contrived not to beat them on Thursday night. I think on Sunday they should be fine, because I don't see any reason to change the front six at all. And the front six played pretty well, apart from not scoring enough goals against Sevilla. With the way things are at the moment, although Sancho faded very, very quickly in the second half, there isn't an alternative there. Garnacho's injured and Rashford's injured. So I think to keep a settled front six makes infinite sense. Sabitz has benefited from it. Fernandes is playing well. I think Antony it was a shame for him last night ended the way it did, and Ty's right, because it's the Antony, isn't it, that people talk about. He looked like a complete so-and-so against,
Samuel,
was it Sheriff when he did it?
Before. I've saw you do that on purpose. Don't come
you may have seen me try. It might have been an unwitting attempt at it. It would never have been deliberate, but he looked like an idiot when he did it against Sheriff, and he did that 0-0 as well, with half time looming against a team from Moldova, I think, who, if it was 0-0 at half time, then there'd have been questions asked of United. And then he tries it last night. Like, there's absolutely no need for it. And he was subbed that evening, although I think he was injured, but it was unclear at the time whether he'd been punished by Ten Hag. But Antony's been playing well of late, so there's no need to take him out of the team. There's no need to take Marshall out of the team, because Marshall was excellent. He didn't get a goal, but as a striker's performance, that was all it was lacking against Sevilla for his hour on the pitch. But next week, it was always shaping up to be a big week, but next week is huge now, because we those of us going to Seville, we thought we were going to have a similar trip to last month, going out there with the tie all but boxed off and maybe not a lot to write about. But now it's going to have a major bearing on United's season. And 3 days later, they've got the FA Cup semi-final against a Brighton side who'd have, because they're such a good side, would have fancied their chances against United anyway. But when you consider the key personnel United may be without for that game, I don't think whatever team United put out against Brighton, if Brighton win, I don't think it should be regarded as a shock, because they're that good a side, and they've turned over United a couple of times in the last year.
Pep Guardiola described Brighton as the best team from playing out the back in the world today. It's quite the cool, isn't it? From Pep. He does sort of he does this with teams who he's pulverised, hasn't he? Yeah. Exactly.
It's like Marcelo Bielsa, so good, so good. But every time Barcelona played Athletic Bilbao, it was 3-0 or 4-0 or a thrashing of some sort.
You could do a Pep Guardiola impression when you retire, Samuel. If you need a bit of cash, I'd hire you.
I think it's decent. That was half-hearted as well. So maybe I'll give the full.
I've got an impression of my own coming up, but I'll save that for part two. It'll be interesting centre-back situation, of course, it really will. And hopefully both of those players are back sooner rather than later, because they've been superb. But we'll leave it there for part one. We'll be back in a moment for part two. So Ty, we did get into the negatives every league, because that's what it was at the end of the game, really disappointing. But as Samuel kind of touched upon there in his last answer, there were a lot of positives on the night. I think the attackers, apart from not killing the tie, they worked really well and they connected really, really well. Looked brilliant, really. Sabitzer, let's talk about him. Scored a brace, 2 fantastic goals. Is it a case of Rio Ferdinand once said, anyway, sign the numbers, put the contract on the table, man, give him anything he wants? Is it a case of that? And is Sabitzer done enough to earn a permanent move in the summer?
I think he's probably done enough to be considered, but I would caution against it for the reasons I've said on previous podcasts. That the last thing that midfield needs is another 29-year-old. it's got Fernandes, who turns 29 in September, Casemiro 31, Eriksen 31, Fred 30. What's the point in signing someone who's going to be 4th/5th choice if they sign another midfielder this summer who's 29? It just doesn't make any sense to me. And yeah, he's done pretty well, but there's younger players who could come in and do exactly the same job for that midfield as
Where is your
4th or 5th
enthusiasm?
choices.
He's fantastic. He's been fantastic in number 10 role, hasn't he? Surely the last 2 weeks.
He was good, and he's a very good presser, but there is, there are midfielders, there are number 8s, number 10s in midfield in Europe who are younger, who can do just as good a job, I think, as Sabitzer. And like I say, he's done good. And if he was 24, I'd say sign him. But I do think you've got to have an eye on the age profile of that squad. And if you want to see what happens when you only sign Asian midfielders and don't sign any younger ones, then just have a look at Liverpool this season. And there's, we can look at the moment and say, well, the United midfield is nowhere near that, but Liverpool's wasn't last season. It can happen pretty quickly when you have a midfield that is heading to the point where on the improvement curve starts heading downhill rather than uphill. So I think it would be a dangerous game to have, if you're going to have a midfield 5, say, of Fred, Sabitzer, Casemiro, Eriksen, Fernandes, they're all 29 to 31. Who's next? You're not going to say Scott McTominay's next to come in and start in one of those positions if one of those does start to struggle or anything. So no, I don't think it would make any sense to sign him permanently. But I do think he played very well last night. I think that switch with Fernandes has worked well. Sabitzer's pressing is excellent, better than Fernandes's, I think. I thought it was noticeable last night, the number of runs he was making and those third-man runs that managers like, running beyond Martial, beyond the forwards. Both his goals came from running beyond the last line of defence and getting through essentially one-on-one, really, which is what you want from someone in that position, almost playing as a second striker at times. So yeah, he did play very well, and at the moment he is playing very well. I think that's 5 starts in a row now. First time he's done that for United. First time he's done it for anyone since September. So you can see that he's got probably that rhythm and that match fitness that he needed now to show his best. And I think he's clearly above Fred in that midfield, and at the moment he'll hold off Eriksen on fitness alone. So yeah, I thought he played very well, but no, I wouldn't be signing him this summer.
That's fair enough. That's sensible analysis. I'll let you off. But one thing you didn't mention was that he was wearing gloves. That is a negative. On such a mild night, Sabitzer was wearing gloves. You could get a tan at Old Trafford last night.
A mild night? You can tell you were sat inside, mate.
No, tell you, just forgetting I am from Newcastle, so anything moderately above 10 degrees is considered warm.
Yeah. You were the topless guy, were you?
That was me. Another positive, Samuel, was Marshall. We've discussed him a lot this season, his fitness issues. And we all know, I think Gary Neville summed it up, you talked about that last week, where he says, look, we all know about Marshall. Fantastic player, quality, sharp when he plays, but his fitness is the problem. He did look really sharp, in all fairness to him, didn't he, last night? He was essential to that link-up play for the first 2 goals. But as we've talked about, and as I just keep saying, the problem is his fitness, isn't it? He's probably just not going to stay fit.
He's been training for more than 5 weeks now, and if United aren't going to push him, and I asked Ten Hag about it again, not again, but there's always a different Marshall question to ask at the moment in terms of his return to the team. It's a sub appearance, so then is he ready to start? Then he starts, and then is it ready to play 90 minutes? And Ten Hag said it's still a risk, and this is a player who, as I said, has been back training for 5 weeks, going to be nearly 5.5 weeks by the time the Forest game comes along. And that is why, or one of the reasons why they want a striker in the summer. I think my friends messaged me during the game last night and said that sagacious pundit Robbie Savage had said, "Oh, if Marshall plays like this, then Man United won't need a striker," which is,
that's why
from the king of bad takes, it is a bad take. It's something that you could have said 3 years ago. It's something you could have said 4 years ago, 5 years ago. Going back probably to this time in Marshall's first season even. And every time United have needed to sign a striker, and there's been a reason why they have kept on signing strikers. I suppose 3 years ago there wasn't an essential need for a new number 9 to come in, but Cavani did on deadline day, and that was as much because COVID had wrecked Odin Igalo's United career. He was actually quite handy for United, and then after the season resumed, he was not of much use whatsoever. And that's the frustration with Martial, is that everything is there. The talent is there. The quality. The assist for Sabitza's second goal was one of the best pieces of play I've ever seen from him. I think what enhanced it from our view certainly was that Wan-Bissaka was coming up on the right hand side, and another player would have seen him in oceans of space and thought immediately, right, get it out to him because nobody's marking him. And if you play a pass that a lot of people can't see, that's a sign of a great pass, and it really was for Sabitzer. I mean, Sabitzer was pointing at Marshall straight away as he celebrated, and again, that's normally a good sign that the player, the provider, has done a brilliant piece of work, and it was one of those assists that was probably better than the goal itself. He will start, it feels like, against Forest on Sunday unless he sustains another injury. But we United cannot be, and they will not allow themselves to get into this cycle where he's going to be the main striker they're depending on. And can he play 90 minutes? Can he not play 90 minutes? That in itself was a problem, because if he could play 90 minutes, then he probably wouldn't have come off last night. And you're not putting Weghorst on, who, as I said, in front of goal at the moment, there's just no confidence there whatsoever, especially when he's laying the ball off to a left back. But it's going to be tricky for United, because they are very much managing Marshall in a way that is curated for him, and they are treating him with kid gloves. But you're still expecting, when you go to a Ten Hag press conference and the injury question is asked, or the team news question is asked, you're half expecting him to say Anthony Marshall won't be available because he suffered a setback in training. If he can get through these last 2 months of the season without getting injured, then you would imagine United will have a good end to the season, because when he's fit and firing, he's a brilliant player to watch. But we keep saying the same thing about Marshall. It seems like every year that he's at United, and there has to come a point where you just do what's the best thing for the club and the player and for all parties concerned. And I suppose, looking at it from a somewhat cynical perspective, but it's certainly United's perspective, is that if he does stay fit for the running and he is playing like this, he's a much more sellable asset than he was during those 3 months when he wasn't getting a kick because he was out injured.
I'll be staggered. A little pleasantly surprised, to be fair, if Marshall does not have another injury from now until the end of the season. But it would be great to see, because he has really, really struggled, which is well documented. Under the subject of BT punditry and BT coverage then, you guys wouldn't have saw De Gea's pre-match interview, where for the first time I thought it was quite interesting. He was a bit vague over his future. He said, I want to win trophies this season. But he said, let's see what happens. And I thought that was him kind of leaving the door open to a potential exit. Samuel, I know you asked De Gea about his future last week, but Ty, me and Sammy were chatting about it just ahead of the weekend. Earlier in the week. What do you think is going to happen with De Gea's future? Because they're obviously negotiating a new deal. And I asked Samuel this question: do you think it's possible that we could see him leave the club in the summer?
No, I don't think he will. And I know there's 2.5 months to go.
I just found those comments really interesting, because in the press conference,
but I think direct,
that was a bit more vague.
Yeah, but I don't think he's saying it to give an honest take, shall we say. I think he's saying it probably for the benefit of John Murtagh, and part of the negotiating to maybe
wait it out, get a bit of salary.
Didn't he say?
I don't see who it benefits.
It's going to end in a happy end, and he said that multiple times in the mix.
He said it all the time, which maybe weakened his negotiating position, because he's said all along. I mean, he said when we interviewed him on a bed in Perth on pre-season, he said to Samuel,
he did what,
I think it was Samuel's question about finishing his career at United, and he said he would, and maybe that was the relaxed mood of the Manchester pack being draped across a hotel bed that made him giddy. But he has said it all season that it's gonna end happily, and it is a bit of a change of tune now. But I don't see who it benefits for him to leave, because for me the best offer he would get is at United. If he goes where there is no market for him on that money, even at United, he will have to take a pay cut
Saudi
to stay
Arabia.
at United. But I would still, that's it. Yeah, I would still hazard a guess that out of European clubs, United will pay him more than anyone else. I mean, if he goes back to Spain, you're talking like a Sevilla, maybe a Villarreal. They ain't going to be able to pay him more than 50, 60 grand a week, probably. There's no market for him in Spain. There's no market for him at PSG. Maybe Italy, but I can't see that any of them would match what United would pay him. I think United want him to stay. I think Ten Hag's accepted now that he's probably worth keeping for another couple of years. It'd be cheaper to get him to sign a new contract, even on 150 grand a week, than to sign a new first choice keeper. I don't see who it benefits to leave. So I don't see a scenario where it happens. And I don't think it's in De Gea's interest to go, because, like I said, I don't think he'll get a better offer. And I just don't think. I just don't see it. Basically, I don't see it happening that he goes for nothing, because I don't think he's playing hardball as well. I think because he knows that United aren't going to turn around and say, right, well, that's it, that's our last offer, we're done here. Because I don't think United want that. So I think eventually it's all just part of the games around contract talks. I don't really see either party thinking it's beneficial for it to end in De Gea leaving. So I don't see why he would leave. I might be wrong, but that's just my reading of it.
We'll clip this up when his contract's announced in a month's time. Regarding your expectation for the second leg, Samuel, just round off this segment, what are you expecting really? Because we sat on this podcast a couple of days ago and I confidently said, look, United are going to breeze through this tie, and that prediction looked on at half time. It's going to be a really tricky game, isn't it, considering the injuries and the suspensions for next week?
It certainly is, and that is a very atmospheric stadium as well. It's one of the best atmospheres I've experienced, and that was for a pretty forgettable game in 2018 that ended 0-0. Sevilla will probably fancy themselves on the strength of playing at home, of coming from 2-0 down to get it back to 2-2, and also the injuries that have piled up for United. United are somewhat optimistic that Rashford could be back for that game, which would obviously be a huge boost, and they do need some concrete news on the injury front to stand them in good stead going into that game, whether it's Rashford or Varane who's able to make it. I think they take either of them at this rate. But it's this is the quirk of the away goals rule being abolished. We're back at square one. It's effectively 0-0 again. What happened in Old Trafford is by and large quite meaningless, apart from the psychological fillip that Sevilla have taken from it. In terms of the football side of things, it's a clean slate for everyone. So you would still back United to score in Spain, even without Fernandes and Rashford, and taking into account their goal scoring issues, and maybe reinforcing their focus and the need to actually be more clinical and take their chances. Maybe that will finally get them to a point where they're actually putting the ball in the back of the net more often than we're accustomed to seeing from them. But it really wouldn't surprise me if, again, this I think the Barcelona tie had the makings of it, and it wasn't far off with that opportunity for Lewandowski at the death, but it certainly got the makings of going into extra time as well. But United's record in Spain recently has been pretty good as well. This is a very different setting though. It's a much more, there's a lot more jeopardy riding on this one, where it is a second leg, and the tie is well and truly open as well.
I don't know about both of you, but I was quite disappointed to see the away goals abandoned. That's the drama for me. But I mean, in this case, it's good for United.
Doesn't it? Yeah.
This case is for and against, but we'll not get into that.
Yeah.
Really, that's for another day. And we'll round off there, and we'll be back in a moment for a look ahead to the Forest game on Sunday afternoon. Now it's another trip to the City ground for you and Samuel. A fantastic little stadium. Do you think Sunday's game could be a potential banana skin to United? I mean, Forest are obviously struggling. They picked up a bit, but really the last few results have been quite woeful. But they are fighting for survival, and Ten Hag talked about that when Everton visited. He talked about the mentality of these teams. It does make it difficult. And also regarding team selection, do you think we could see Christian Eriksen start the game? Because we just discussed before, Fernandes is going to be suspended for that second leg in Spain. So does it make sense to put Eriksen in from the start, or do you think he'll start with Fernandes and just go full strength? How do you think that's going to work out?
I think he'd start with Fernandes and go as full strength as they can. Certainly the midfield, I think I would expect it to be the same as Thursday night with Eriksen coming on. I think it's probably a touch too soon still for Eriksen to be starting games, but you never know. I mean, he got half an hour, I suppose, on Thursday night, didn't he? But I think you'd probably look at another 20 minutes, 30 minutes at Forest, and then start at Sevilla. I mean, it's definitely got potential to be a banana skin purely on what happened on Thursday night and the fact that they've got so many injuries now. You're without Rashford, you're going to be without your first two centre backs, and like Samuel said, the back four doesn't look hugely convincing when you see it on paper now. And if Shaw's fit, it could be that Solskjaer back four or back five with the goalkeeper. So I think it's a banana skin. Like you say, Forest form is pretty reckless. I mean, pretty awful, sorry. Steve Cooper seems to be surviving game to game there at the moment, and got the old-fashioned vote of confidence last week, didn't he? I saw, and that usually means that you're one game from the sack, and you can see Forest, although all the fans I think want him to stay. And I think if they sacked Steve Cooper and went down, I think Steve Cooper would be back in the Premier League before Nottingham Forest would be. But I'm not sure that'll necessarily stop them from sacking him. And they are on, I was just having a look there, they've not won since February the 5th. So they are on a dreadful run of form. I guess it can be a tricky place to go. They were quite good at the City Ground earlier in the season, but United made very short work of going there in the Carabao Cup semi-final, and they should be doing the same again. But like we say, it has got potential to be a banana skin just because of the fact United played on Thursday, have got these injuries now, and it went so badly wrong. But you feel that they could do with a win just to kind of get back on the horse and get that feeling from Thursday night out of their system.
The results picked up a bit, but as I've just kind of said, they're quietly struggling again. I didn't notice until I checked Tyres Usage recently. When you look at their last 5 games, they've been really, really poor. Samuel, you said you'd expect probably the attacking six, so the front and three, and the midfield to stay the same. We've talked about Marshall's fitness. Do you think he can play a full 90 minutes for his condition at the moment? Do you think that's possible, or do you think it's inevitable that Weghorst will be brought on at some point?
No. I answered that question earlier as Ten Hag answered it for me earlier this afternoon. He said that it's a risk still. That's not ideal for United, because if they're in a situation where the game's even at an hour in, which it was obviously against Sevilla, and you have to take him off, then you're weakening the team unless you find an alternative solution to putting Weghorst up front. Maybe you need to be a bit more creative and, I don't know, possibly move Sancho through the middle or Anthony through the middle, but someone who's more of a goal scorer in threat than Weghorst. I know Anthony has been playing quite well recently without actually scoring. He's not got a Premier League goal since October, so whatever the alternative is, it's imperfect. But it just comes back to this point that they need a striker in the summer. Any argument suggests that they're fine with the current attacks that they've got is nonsense. It's a completely nonsensical argument that a player who has not completed 90 minutes in the Premier League for more than 2 years still cannot complete 90 minutes in the Premier League. And the earliest point he's going to be able to do that this month is, at the moment, it's shaping up to be Tottenham away on, I think that's April the 27th. Is anybody expecting him to do it then? Probably not. I think it would be a surprise if Marshall gets 90 minutes under his belt for United before the end of the season, because he's being treated so carefully by the medical staff and by Ten Hag. And Ten Hag knows how much better United are with him in the team and how much more fluid they are. I think if you look at the that run in the team that Marshall had earlier in the season, when he came back from injury and he stayed fit when he wasn't playing at the World Cup for France, I think when United resumed their campaign against Burnley, I think he must have started about pretty much five or six Premier League games on the spin. It was only when the City game came along and then he had to withdraw from it at half time. But this is the problem they have with him. They were treated him quite carefully then, and he wasn't completing 90 minutes. He was coming off at certain points. But there comes to a point where he's liable to break down. And Forest, they've got a few bruises in their team as well, and they can be quite a physical side. United should still beat them regardless, but whatever way they go about it with the attack, even with Rashford fit, it's not ideal, because Rashford is not United centre forward. He plays off the left. He only plays through the middle when he absolutely has to, and it got to the point where Weghorst's place was untenable. And even though Marshall wasn't ready to start a game they thought, well, we'll have to play Rashford through the middle and accommodate Sancho on the left. So they have options in that sense, but it comes back to the tip of the arrow, and whoever starts there, they're just not sharp enough, whether it's lack of goals or a lack of fitness. And that there have been a few occasions where that has cost them this season. And unfortunately for United, in the situation they're in at the moment, and with the games, with the schedule as hectic as it is, and with there's so much to play for, it's liable to be an issue again between now and what I think their season could end at the very latest June the 3rd in the FA Cup final.
Are you listening, Robbie Savage? I hope so. Real Marshall. To end the podcast then, Ty, I've had a quick look at the table. United are obviously in 4th, Newcastle are above them on goal difference. Now, we all thought that probably had 3rd wrapped up, and then the last few weeks, or a month and a half, suddenly been blown up in that quote-unquote race for the top 4. But the question I wanted to ask you really was, obviously Tottenham sitting 5th, they're 3 points behind. Do you think they have the quality to really put pressure on the top 4?
I think they have the quality. I'm not sure they have the consistency, the way their season's going. But obviously, that game at Tottenham is going to be big. I don't know what the situation in terms of games played will be. Then obviously, United aren't playing next weekend. I'm not sure if Tottenham are. I presume they are actually. So it might be level on games played there. So with the gap, that they could. And I suppose theoretically, United could go into that game at Tottenham actually in 5th if Tottenham are playing and winning their game in hand by then, given their goal difference advantage. So that would make it a real pressure game for United, I think. So yeah, there's certainly still reason to be looking over their shoulder. It makes these games at Forest even bigger. Their running is tricky. That Tottenham game comes at a point where they've got some real testing away games. They've got Brighton away the following Thursday, who, best team in the world, building up from the back. And I think we'll touch on this next week, but I actually think the way Brighton play could be a real headache for the way United have played so often under Ten Hag. So I think that away game, depending on what happens in the Cup semi-final, could be tricky. West Ham away, they might be in a position where they're fighting for points. You feel like they're a better team than they've shown this season, a team capable of raising their game on the day. So they've got some tricky games. Those 3 especially, in the space of, what would it be, 3 out of 4 would be away from home. So there's reason to still be looking over their shoulder. It does feel, and it has felt for a long time, like 4th is guaranteed. But I think we are in a position now where, especially with the way the injuries have happened and the way the squad could be stretched over the final weeks of the season, and the fact that they're still in these competitions when Tottenham, for example, have nothing else to play for, makes it one to be cautious, and given they've got much tougher games to be coming up against, you can't really afford to be slipping up away at Nottingham Forest.
I think it does them it's a big favour for them that on the day of the semi-final against Brighton, Tottenham are at Newcastle, so you've got essentially the two clubs United sandwiched between. They can't both take 3 points in that game, obviously. So that might at least halt some of Tottenham's momentum. And even this weekend with Spurs playing Bournemouth at home, Bournemouth are doing very well at the moment, and you wouldn't put it past Bournemouth to get something out of that as well. So there is some hope for United that at least before they go to Tottenham Stadium in just under 2 weeks' time, that Tottenham might drop points in at least, well, possibly both of those games. I don't think many people will be banking on them taking 6 points from those two anyway.
Not a chance Tottenham even get a point at St James's Park. We'll leave that there. Thank you very much, Samuel, for your time.
Thank you, Stephen.
And thank you, Tyrone.
Thank you, Stephen.
And is anyone doing anything interesting this weekend before we jump off? Anything of note apart from covering the match on Sunday?
Going to Nottingham.
I'm going to a wedding in Manchester City Centre tomorrow.
Okay, you're on steady duty anytime.
Samuel, no, I'm going to Forest as well. I'm at a wedding tomorrow in Manchester City Centre.
Oh, there you go.
Samuel will be driving my soul to Nottingham on Saturday. Hopefully it'll be.
We're just awaiting. We're just awaiting your Grand National tip, Stephen. That's it now. Yeah. Off air, obviously, we don't share any state secrets.
I look forward to hearing on Monday whose car playlist is better, Tyrone's or Rich's. I'll have to get that answer from you, Samuel.
Oh, Rich's is impossible to beat, I think.
Big statement. I take that personally. Take care of the listeners. Check her out on all the audio platforms, YouTube, Spotify, Apple, as usual. Have a great weekend. Take care.